Hello and welcome to The Late Show. Today is Monday the 18th of December. And yes, we're only 1 week away from Christmas, but we're not discussing that today. We're discussing Donald Trump's historical recognition of Israeli sovereignty over Israel's eternal city, that is Jerusalem. And in today's programme, I'm joined by my good friend, Michael McCann from Israel-Britain Alliance. Welcome to The Late Show.
Thanks, Simon.
Pleasure. And my other good friend as well, Peter Baum, founder of Southend Friends of Israel, and also serving on the Board of Deputies. So welcome to the programme.
Good evening to you.
I'll start off with you, Peter. I know that you've been on the Middle East Report a few times, but can you share with a little bit with our viewers about the work that you do and how you're really developing new arguments in order to break down the enemy's lies about Israel and also Jerusalem?
Yeah, absolutely. Both within the Board of Deputies of British Jews and Southend Friends of Israel, and another group that I'm involved with called Fair Reporting, what we're trying to do is to counter some of the propaganda that has been so successfully originated by anti-Israeli groups. So when we hear in the media words like apartheid, illegal occupation, etc., we try and counter that narrative by challenging it every time we see it in the press or in media articles. And we work quite closely with BBC Watch to ensure that they're countering to that kind of propaganda also gets widely distributed amongst the community at large. So really it's an ongoing process. It's very difficult. We have had minor successes, but there still seems to be a huge continuation of people in the media to have this very anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish state, one could even say anti-Semitic bias.
You won't get that here, though, Peter, which is good.
Indeed.
And Michael, it's great to have you on the programme, and it's been quite a year for you, so I just want to congratulate you on your many campaigns that have really made a difference. What's been one of the highlights of one of the campaigns you've organised this year through Israel-Britain Alliance?
Well, there's been many highlights, Simon, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the Revelation 2 TV viewers that have got involved in our campaigns, and indeed Revelation TV for giving us a much needed oxygen of publicity. Couple of highlights: Israel Apartheid Week. 3 words which should never be used in the same sentence because They're untrue. We shut down events on university campuses. We stopped the hatred taking place across the country, and we'll be doing it again in 2018 because Israel is not an apartheid state. It's the only place where people can practice their religion, whatever faith they celebrate. They can practice it freely and without fear. And it's a place, that, most importantly for Christians, in terms of many people will be watching the show tonight, where they know they can go, they can walk in the footsteps of Jesus, and they can celebrate their faith. So that was a huge campaign. But again, the general election was another one. We ran the Pledge for Israel campaign. Well over 200 candidates said they supported our pledge, which made a number of commitments to Israel, and around about half of those individuals were elected to Parliament. And the good news is, Simon, is that through the many supporters we've got across the country, we'll be making sure that they stick to that pledge in their time in Parliament.
Fantastic. I'll talk about Jerusalem, and I had the privilege of being in Jerusalem only last week, Peter, with our wonderful Revelation TV viewers, and this channel took 129 viewers out to Israel and Jordan as part of a 12-day tour. And to be in Israel when President Donald Trump declared that he recognised Israeli sovereignty over Jerusalem and was going to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was quite incredible. Felt like this was an historic moment. Peter, as a Jewish person, what does Jerusalem mean to you?
It's everything to Jewish people. You would know, Simon, that in the Old Testament, Jerusalem's mentioned over 800 times. I think in the New Testament it's mentioned over 200 times. It's in our prayers. It's part of our spiritual and religious ethnicity. It means everything to the Jewish people. We often hear on the media that Jerusalem is the third most sacred city for Muslims. It's never mentioned that it's the most holy city for Jewish people in the world, and that never comes over. So when Mr. Trump made that pronouncement, when President Trump made that pronouncement, it really was a historical moment. There is no doubt about it. Quite an event. And what's interesting is that although in the world of politics, as one could expect in the United Nations, it hasn't gone down particularly well, I've noted recently that certain Arab Muslim academics have actually endorsed President Trump's announcement. A very famous scholar, Abdul Hamid Hakim, of the head of the Middle East Centre for Strategic and Legal Studies, actually this weekend endorsed President Trump's pronouncement, as did a very eminent Pakistani historian and scholar. So hopefully, if this gains more momentum, oh, sorry to use that term, but if it does, then I'm sure other countries eventually will follow suit. I'm pretty sure that in 2018 we'll see some African countries endorsing the same pronouncement as President Trump.
Absolutely. So we are live, we are interactive tonight, so love to know your views and your opinions on Donald Trump's historic decision to recognise Israeli sovereignty over Jerusalem. And let's not forget that prior to Donald Trump, no US administration has ever recognised East or West Jerusalem as being Israel's capital. But he also said that he would move the US Embassy from its current location on the shores of the Mediterranean in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So what are your opinions on this historic move by President Trump? It's been an extraordinary year. I mean, if we take ourselves back a year, and I know that you very much led the campaign against the UN Resolution 2334. That was the UN Security Resolution that was drafted by British diplomats and also by the US government, which effectively said that Israel's capital, Jerusalem, and particularly East Jerusalem, where the Old City is, where the Western Wall is, where the Temple Mount is, which is sacred to the Jewish people, was occupied Palestinian land. And then we saw also UNESCO votes, UNESCO voting that wanted to de-Judicize Jerusalem. And now we have, at the end of the year, Donald Trump recognising Jerusalem. What are your opinions?
Yep, what a difference a year makes. Harold Wilson famously said a week's a long time in politics, but look at the transformation that's taken place. You're absolutely right. UNSCR 2334 was a deliberate attempt by President Barack Obama to try and leave office with a bang. And it would have been a bang, because he would have led both his nation and the Middle East into complete and utter turmoil. Because remember, the game plan was, past 2334, have a ridiculous peace conference in Paris where neither of the two protagonists were present, neither Israel or the Palestinians. And then the game plan was to move it back to the UN to have another Security Council resolution, again attacking Israel. That didn't happen, and I want again to thank Revelation TV viewers, because we mounted a campaign in between Christmas and New Year, over 5,500 emails in just a matter of days to Theresa May. And ultimately what happened, and we made our contribution, but the British government didn't send a full delegation to the Paris Peace Conference, and the grand plan, the corrupt grand plan, collapsed. And now we get the momentous decision made by President Trump. And you know what the most bizarre thing is? As a former politician, Simon, President Trump must be the only politician in history who gets criticised for keeping a campaign promise.
Oh, that's very true.
For keeping a campaign promise. Extraordinary. But it's a decision that's made, quite frankly, for all the right reasons, and I think it's got significant ramifications, because unlike other commentators and unlike our own national channel, the BBC, who have tried to provoke confrontation, looking actually forward to a third intifada, the position is that I think that this could lead to the process of peace, because we need to stop pandering to Palestinian victimhood, where ordinary Palestinians are kept in penury whilst their leaders live lives of luxury and do not lead. and I think this could really open up a rich seam opportunity, contrary to what many commentators have said, not to lead to violence, but it could lead to peace.
Absolutely. So we got our first email into the programme, so appreciate that, Clive. And Clive writes, "Hi Simon, I believed the lies about Israel for many years, but thanks to Revelation TV, I have come to know the truth. I think it's only right that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Donald Trump has done the right thing." So I very much agree with you, Clive, and thank you for emailing in. Please do email into the programme. This is your programme. We are live, we are interactive tonight, and I'd love to know your views and your opinion on Donald Trump's historical decision to recognise Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem. Let's have a look at this news item, which was roughly about a year ago when the international community was gathering against Jerusalem.
Gordon, tensions are high between Israel and the Obama administration after the Obama team refused to veto a United Nations resolution just before Christmas and Hanukkah, attacking Israel over its settlements. Israel says that move has pushed peace even further away. Chris Mitchell brings us that story.
Israelis heading into the Hanukkah holiday were stunned, though not surprised by the UN resolution.
It means for Israel that the USA has decided to provide tailwind to rogue regimes which control the United Nations.
The UN resolution says Israeli settlements in the West Bank and Eastern Jerusalem have no legal validity and demands a halt to Jewish building. The U.S. opposes settlements, but has always backed Israel at the UN.
We agreed that the Security Council was not the place to resolve this issue. We knew that going there would make negotiations harder and drive peace further away. And as I told John Kerry on Thursday, friends don't take friends to the Security Council.
Israel won the territory in the 1967 Six-Day War. About 500,000 Israelis live there in biblical Judea and Samaria and Eastern Jerusalem, but Palestinians want it for a future state.
I'm encouraged by the statements of our friends in the United States, Republicans and Democrats alike. They understand how reckless and destructive this UN resolution was. They understand that the Western Wall isn't occupied territory.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump tweeted it would make it much harder to negotiate peace. Too bad, but we will get it done anyway. Senior Obama aide Ben Rhodes denied Israel had been ambushed, but said Trump's not in charge yet. Israel says it has proof that Obama himself was behind the resolution, which it will present to Trump once he's in office.
There's no doubt that the resolution is in sync with Obama's worldview, because according to President Obama, irrespective of reality, the Palestinian issue is the core cause of Middle East turbulence, the crown jewel of Arab policymaking, and the crux of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Former Israeli liaison to Congress, Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, said Obama isn't a classic lame duck president, but will leave with thundering steps.
Those steps could be domestic steps, those steps could be global, those steps could be Mideast, but we ain't seen nothing yet, and we better wait between now and January 20th for further surprises from the White House.
So for now, Israel and many in the U.S. are watching and waiting and praying for a smooth transition of power. Chris Mitchell, CBN News.
Extraordinary to think that that was a year ago. Now, I've got an email in from Val who writes, Donald Trump was right to state the obvious. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. So thank you for that one. And please do feel free to send in your emails and your text messages tonight. Peter, I mean, what a contrast between President Obama and President Trump in his warmth. This is Trump in his warmth to Israel and to the Jewish people. And, it seems that Israel has a very, very close friend in the White House right now.
Absolutely, and as Michael said before, isn't it incredible that he's an American president that's being criticised for keeping his campaign promises? That's a paradox. But also, it was clear that there was no personal dynamics between Netanyahu and Obama. and there certainly is between Netanyahu and Donald Trump and his innermost circles, such as Mike Pence. Also, it has to be remembered that the current ambassador to Israel, Mr. David Freeman, a very knowledgeable intellect, and he has managed to persuade Mr. Trump, who he's known for many years, of the religious, legal and historical aspects which legitimise Israel's claim to Jerusalem and absolutely delegitimise any Islamic claim to Jerusalem at all. The fabrication that Jerusalem is of religious or historical or legal importance to Islam is an absurdity. And I think Michael again was right by saying that this recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital will only enhance the chances for peace rather than make it more difficult. And I think once we see these few days of rioting, which we will have, certainly probably for the next couple of Shabbats, I think the Arab world will recognise that they're going to have to sit down and talk with Israel and Jerusalem being its de facto capital.
Yeah, Peter. I mean, I was out in Jerusalem when that announcement was made, and literally on the Friday, they thought the Friday, a couple of days after the announcement, the whole world's media was out by the Damascus Gate in Jerusalem, waiting for this day of rage to emerge, and yet virtually nothing happened. And the same within the territories as well. It's not until you actually hear in Britain and then you switch on the news and you get this very distorted view of what's going on, a very distorted view of reality. And watching Sky News, who I usually consider to be quite fair when it comes to these issues, was actually inciting many Palestinian Arabs to actually take to the streets in protest at Donald Trump's decision, almost inciting violence. And that was a lot of the media take. And when you're there, it's completely different contrast. Obviously, there were a few, we were told not to, we had a trip to Judea and Samaria to go and see some gardens in Ariel, but advised not to do that. But we walked around the old city, not any sort of trouble at all. So, you know, this is a difference between what's reality and what's actually happening. Michael, I got an email from Faye. I'll let you answer this one. She goes, hello, I'm delighted at President Trump's announcement. Apart from praying for the peace of Jerusalem, what else can we do to support Israel? And that's Faye from North Yorkshire.
Well, we're going to have lots of campaigns in 2018, Faye, which will give you an opportunity to support Israel in a whole variety of different ways. But one thing that we like to do as well, apart from just running campaigns, as much as what the Southend Friends of Israel does and Peter's great work, is to educate people and to give them the courage and the confidence to take forward debates. The stench of hypocrisy in our nostrils from the international community and our own government should be absolutely thick, because this is the extraordinary part. Do many of your viewers know that the British consulate to the Palestinians is, guess where? Jerusalem. Our government and our Foreign Office have created this, and the BBC and all the other commentators have tried to create this atmosphere where terrible violence is imminent. The third intifada is on the way. And guess what's happened? Is that they don't talk about the fact that the British consulate to the Palestinian people, which I've been in when I was previously involved in politics, is in Jerusalem. But yet they deny that same opportunity which Israel has as a sovereign state to name its capital and to have all its government functions in its capital, which is Jerusalem. It's utterly extraordinary. And what we want to make sure is that when people are contacting their elected politicians, is to be armed with the facts. Because Peter's already mentioned, occupied Palestinian territory. There is no Palestinian territory. You know, there's just it's a factually incorrect statement. You often hear the phrase, it's against international law. And then when you question, well, which international law are you talking about? Then it's silence. People repeat these phrases, and people can sometimes get intimidated when you mention the law, or you mention some other phrase. Well, everyone says it's wrong. But then when you dig beneath or scrape away the veneer, you find out that it's not wrong. And in actual fact, the truth is a far, far different matter. So we want to get people involved in our campaigns, but we want to also arm them with that crucial information, so that when they're having those little discussions in the street with their friends or neighbours, and someone says something, they can then say, well, do you actually know what the real truth is? Let me tell you. And that's what we aim to do in 2018 as well.
Fantastic. Let's go and listen now to President Trump when he made the historic announcement back on the 6th of December that he recognized Israeli sovereignty over their eternal city, Jerusalem, and that he plans to move the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Thank you. When I came into office, I promised to look at the world's challenges with open eyes and very fresh thinking. We cannot solve our problems by making the same failed assumptions and repeating the same failed strategies of the past. Old challenges demand new approaches. My announcement today marks the beginning of a new approach to conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. In 1995, Congress adopted the Jerusalem Embassy Act, urging the federal government to relocate the American embassy to Jerusalem and to recognize that that city, and so importantly, is Israel's capital. This act passed Congress by an overwhelming bipartisan majority and was reaffirmed by a unanimous vote of the Senate only 6 months ago. Yet for over 20 years, every previous American president has exercised the law's waiver, refusing to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem or to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital city. Presidents issued these waivers under the belief that delaying the recognition of Jerusalem would advance the cause of peace. Some say they lacked courage, but they made their best judgment based on facts as they understood them at the time. Nevertheless, the record is in. After more than 2 decades of waivers, we are no closer to a lasting peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. It would be folly to assume that repeating the exact same formula would now produce a different or better result. Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. While previous presidents have made this a major campaign promise, they failed to deliver. Today, I am delivering. I've judged this course of action to be in the best interests of the United States of America and the pursuit of peace between Israel and the Palestinians. This is a long overdue step to advance the peace process and to work towards a lasting agreement. Israel is a sovereign nation with the right, like every other sovereign nation, to determine its own capital. Acknowledging this is a fact is a necessary condition for achieving peace. It was 70 years ago that the United States under President Truman recognized the State of Israel. Ever since then, Israel has made its capital in the city of Jerusalem, the capital the Jewish people established in ancient times. Today, Jerusalem is the seat of the modern Israeli government. It is the home of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, as well as the Israeli Supreme Court. It is the location of the official residence of the Prime Minister and the President. It is the headquarters of many government ministries. For decades, visiting American presidents, secretaries of state, and military leaders have met their Israeli counterparts in Jerusalem, as I did on my trip to Israel earlier this year. Jerusalem is not just the heart of three great religions, but it is now also the heart of one of the most successful democracies in the world. Over the past 7 decades, the Israeli people have built a country where Jews, Muslims, and Christians, and people of all faiths are free to live and worship according to their conscience and according to their beliefs. Jerusalem is today and must remain a place where Jews pray at the Western Wall, where Christians walk the stations of the cross, and where Muslims worship at Al-Aqsa Mosque. However, through all of these years, presidents representing the United States have declined to officially recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. In fact, we have declined to acknowledge any Israeli capital at all. But today we finally acknowledge the obvious, that Jerusalem is Israel's capital. This is nothing more or less than a recognition of reality. It is also the right thing to do. It's something that has to be done. That is why, consistent with the Jerusalem Embassy Act, I am also directing the State Department to begin preparation to move the American Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Thank you, President Trump, for that historical announcement that after almost 70 years, the world's leading superpower, the United States, recognizes Israeli sovereignty over their eternal city, Jerusalem. I'm going to read out a few more emails before I ask Peter a question, and this is from Ken, who writes, Simon, one potential benefit of Brexit is the fact that we can adopt our own foreign policy with regards to Israel. Whether we use this freedom wisely remains to be seen. That's a great email, so thank you for that one. Let me see this one. Hi, Simon. Are your guests happy to receive emails requesting arguments which I can use in conversations to support Israel? And are you, Simon, prepared to acknowledge that there are Christian Palestinians in Israel and the West Bank who need our support? Will you endeavour to have some of them represented on your programme called the Middle East Report? I too visited Israel recently and wish to see the UK and Ireland recognising Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Looking forward to hearing from you, Norman. I have interviewed Israeli Arabs on the Middle East Report before, but one thing I won't do is to allow Palestinian Arabs onto the programme who may be Christians who have a gun pointed to their head, and because of the Islamification that's taking place in places like Bethlehem and other areas throughout the Palestinian Authority, just spend the whole time condemning Israel rather than actually telling the truth. So if, and I've had pastors from Bethlehem who've been brave enough and courageous enough to actually tell the truth, then they can be welcome on the Middle East Report. Just going to read out this one from Chris, and he says, just to remind you, in April this year, it was Putin that first recognised West Jerusalem, at least, as the capital of Israel, with little or no reaction. Curious? No? I didn't know that, so thank you for this one. And I'll read out this one. It was great to be in Jerusalem when President Trump announced his decision. I remember how the group celebrated that decision. Once more, it was only Revelation TV that accurately reports on Israel. Many thanks to your guests for their diligence in defending the Jewish state. It was a real eye-opener to see how the media behaved. It was shameful, and they were inciting the Palestinians by their own presence. Great show again. Shalom from Chris. So thank you very much for that one, Chris. Peter, 50 this year we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Jerusalem. from Jordanian control and the unification of Jerusalem. Do you think this is significant? This happened 50 years ago, that now the world-leading superpower has recognized Israeli sovereignty over their eternal city, Jerusalem. And does this go a long way to cementing Israeli control over their capital?
It probably does, Simon. And I think it's important, through the work that Mike's doing especially, to ensure that a much wider audience is fully aware and educated about the truth and the realities surrounding the Jewish people's connection to Jerusalem, and conversely, the lack of connection of Islam and the Palestinians to the city of Jerusalem. So if I could answer in a much broader sense, what I'd like to see happen within the UK, especially within schools, universities, trades unions, etc., is some kind of programme to get people to understand what's going on the religious, legal and historical aspects. Wouldn't it be great if in schools, for example, in religious education lessons, that teachers said, you know, kids, the Quran isn't mentioned, Jerusalem isn't mentioned in the Quran at all. It's mentioned 800 plus times in the Old Testament, 200 plus times in the New Testament. You know what else, kids? The Muslim faith, they turn their backs on Jerusalem to pray in scorn. And the only thing then that Islam tries to propagate to us is the fact that the Prophet Muhammad went from the sacred mosque to the furthest mosque when he ascended to heaven, even though the furthest mosque that Islam considers as being Jerusalem wasn't built until 90 years after the Prophet Muhammad died. So if he did go to the furthest mosque, it certainly wasn't the one in Jerusalem. So in order to I know I've gone on about this to answer your question in a long way, but I just think there needs to be a programme, not to offend people, but to teach people the truth, the realities of the situation. Some Muslim friends of mine mentioned to me that they believe that the turmoil going on in the world of Islam at the moment is purely because most followers of the Islamic faith today have turned their backs on the true teachings of the Quran, which there are so many surahs which actually identify the Jewish people as being the owners, the dwellers of the land of Israel, as opposed to Islam. And that's an interesting scenario to kind of to run with at the moment. And when we talk about the history of Jerusalem, Jerusalem was the capital of Israel some 2,500 years before the religion of Islam was ever thought of. So the absurdity of some commentators today trying to disconnect Jewish people from Jerusalem is just a host of lies. So education, not in an offensive way, in a proper way, and the work that Mike's doing with the British Israel Alliance and what Friends of Israel groups are doing are just trying to do that.
Absolutely. I'm just going to read out a few more emails. This is from June, who writes, "Hi folks, Erdogan had Islamic leaders at the big IOC meeting in Istanbul over the announcement by Trump. Erdogan has said he's going to move the Turkish embassy to East Jerusalem. Do you think this will happen?" Not sure, but I don't know what impact that would have. This is from Brian, who says, "Good evening. This controversy over Jerusalem, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, Israel's city, is the meaning God's possession of peace, as not being the capital of Israel is so ridiculous that it is surreal. Those protagonists, which are showing so much childish anger, really have to turn to the biblical record." This was even the advice of Muhammad, who said that they should look to the books of the Jews if they wanted to know what the God of their forefathers had to say about the land, and even Ishmael would have known this. Unfortunately, the Western established church is keeping very quiet about this matter and appear to be following the international view through the corrupt UN. Blessings and shalom, Brian. Michael, I just want to get your response from Theresa May's announcement, which was a kind of very mixed announcement, really saying that the British government will not move the British embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and that this threatens the Oslo Accords and the peace process. But the fact is that the Muslim Brotherhood particularly want to establish the Islamic Caliphate in Jerusalem, and if, for example, had Donald Trump if he had not recognised Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem, isn't there a great danger that we could actually lose the West? And so therefore, in this battle against Islamic extremism, isn't it essential that Western governments support Israel's right to their eternal city?
You'll need to forgive me for smiling and almost bursting out laughing when this thing about the Oslo Accords being in danger. The Oslo Accords are quite frankly not worth the paper they're written on at the moment. When Donald Trump mentioned there, it was 1995 that the Jerusalem Act was passed, and there's been numerous presidents who've always committed that the state of Israel, the capital will be Jerusalem. So Donald Trump is just putting into effect what the Congress passed unanimously a number of years ago. I wish our country was as brave, because we've actually contributed to the bloodshed and the innocent people that have died, because we have pandered to people who are quite happy to keep their own population in victimhood. Let me assure you, I mean, I've visited Ramallah. I've been in the palace that President Abbas occupies. He's not in penury. He presses a little button at the side of his chair when he wants his cigarette lit, and some wacky comes in and gives him it. And he lives a life of luxury. Meantime, when you go around the streets of Ramallah, you can see the poverty that ordinary Palestinians are kept in, because they've never had a leader brave enough to make peace. And the problem that we have in terms of the Middle East, in my opinion, is that because we have never pressed the Palestinians in their commitment to peace, each time that they fail the test, and I think Bill Clinton said that the only new business that Yasser Arafat brought to the table was claiming that the Jews never had any history in Jerusalem. You know that, and he said it, of course, in a sarcastic way, demonstrating that the Palestinians were not sincere about peace. So, and therefore, our country, and I think this is how a load of different things come together. One of your viewers mentioned Brexit, and there's a powerful geopolitical issue taking place here, because we need a trade deal with the US. We need that deal in order that businesses and jobs survive and are created within our country. And there will become an inevitable pressure that Britain will have to take stands and make choices about who they support and who they don't. We know that we've effectively got two governments operating between the government of the civil service, a permanent government, and in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office we know that they want to sidle up to the Arab countries that they sell various things to, and then they'll say to Israel in private, we're really your friend, but we're going to say some bad things about you because we want to keep friends with them as well. So we have to get over this hypocrisy. And one way that people can make their views known right now, and I forgot to mention this at the start, is our great friends in Christians United for Israel, Des and Remini Starrett and Alistair Kirk and others. They've got a petition going at the moment. Go on to your Google, press Q5 petition and get on there and say that we should be following, our government should be following the American lead and also naming Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Absolutely. So I do have the details in front of me. If you go to change.org and then type in UK must recognise Jerusalem as Israel's capital, give you information where you can sign the petition. I've done that today, actually, in support of that. I just want to read this email from, this one says, "Hi Simon, this is Stephanie. Confirming your statement about being totally safe in Israel regarding Donald Trump's statement. He is stating the obvious and the truth. Powerful, and in the Lord's time, how privileged we are to see everything unfold. Our part is to pray and act, encouraging our MPs to speak on our behalf in support of Israel. Delighted to have signed the latest Kufi petition, 10,000 signatures, but our MPs are ignorant of the truth. Shalom, Simon. Now, we've heard so many media reports, Peter, that President Trump's recognition of Israeli sovereignty over Jerusalem would spark days of rage. US embassies across the Middle East would be burning. Israel would have virtually a third Palestinian intifada on our hands. None of those have come to fruition. Doesn't this say this is just fear-mongering amongst diplomats and the international community?
Yeah, as you recognise, Simon, the media were absolutely hoping for some kind of demonstrations that were far in excess of what's actually happened. Israel's enemies and the media at large must be terribly disappointed. They must be crying that, unfortunately, that Trump's pronouncement hasn't built up a situation that's far more volatile than has been. It's been contained. There has, unfortunately, been some deaths, but frankly, no more than would normally occur in a month in the Middle East anyway. What's frankly amazing, Simon, about the world's media, that whilst all this was going on, I took the time out to see what else was going on in the world. And at the same time that the riots were going on, or the minor confrontations were going on.
At most,
were going on in Jerusalem. At that very same day, Simon, 250 Sudanese Christians were slaughtered. 35 Nigerian Christians were slaughtered. 20 Tanzanian troops were slaughtered in Burundi, and in northern Uganda, there was a village that was suffered some losses as well. None of this was reported, certainly not on Sky and certainly not on the BBC news website, but the rabid over-reporting of anything going on in Jerusalem with an anti-Israel agenda has become part and parcel of our daily lives, unfortunately.
I just want to show you this brilliant quote. I wish we had a Prime Minister like Winston Churchill. So this is from Pamela, who sent this in. I don't know if you can see it there, but there's a picture of Winston Churchill. And this is his quote. It's brilliant. He says, "You ought to let the Jews have Jerusalem. It was they who made it famous." And I think that's brilliant. So we've got 6 minutes. We're down to 6 minutes of the programme. And, you know, for Christian Zionists who love Israel, who love the Jewish people, who really want to stand with Israel, fully endorse and support Donald Trump's courageous and brave decision to recognise Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem. What practical pressure can we apply to members of Parliament and to this government to do the same?
Well, sometimes our natural reaction is to want to get out there and shout for the rooftops in terms of, yeah, this must happen and we want this to take place. I think sometimes we've got to be clever, we've got to be strategic, as well as thinking about the tactics for the different things that we want to achieve. I think the Kufi position, and that's why we completely defer to them in terms of their plans for the petition, because it gives people the opportunity to vent their views on this subject immediately. But in addition to that, what we have to consider is how do we strategically take this issue forward and get the British government, because that's the government that is citizens that we can influence. So therefore, they immediately made this announcement, that, which I think was fundamentally wrong by Theresa May, because I think that the Foreign Office would have written that statement, and she's trying to not fall out or offend President Trump, but by the same token, she wants to keep the British position separate. I think she's making a huge mistake, and I think that if all that we'll do if we follow the current government position is we'll end up in a place where more people are kept in poverty and the status quo prevails, which serves no purpose whatsoever. And it's wrong for the British government to highlight one element, which is about the whole concept of people who have property inside the disputed territory, and that's a proper language to use. And what I often say to people is when they say, they talk about settlements with inverted commas around them, there are 20% of the population of Israel is Arab. Are you saying that if a Palestinian state ever came to pass, that there can be no Jews in that Palestinian state? Think about that.
That's what they're proposing.
That's what people are saying. And you know something? See, when you press them in those really tough questions, our politicians, guess what? They haven't got an answer because they know that they're wrong. So we'll be thinking very carefully about the next steps. I think the Q5 petition will provide a great platform and foundation for future work. But you'll forgive me, Simon, I trust the Revelation TV viewers, but I'm not going to reveal everything this evening. But don't worry, we have it in hand.
Excellent. Right, this is from Erwin, who writes, I just loved Donald's speech, so did I. This is from Margaret, who writes, hello, gentlemen. Trump is justified in his recognition of Israel's capital. We must give lie to the myth that Jerusalem is a sacred place for Islam. Many Islamic scholars believe that it was Medina, not Jerusalem, that Muhammad was referring to when he had the dream of going to heaven from the far mosque. There was no mosque in Jerusalem in Muhammad's lifetime. You could have written this yourself, couldn't you, Peter? It was not until the 11th century that the Islamic imams decided that Jerusalem was where Muhammad flew to go up to heaven. Nowhere is Jerusalem mentioned in the Quran, as it was just a backwater under the Ottoman Empire. You're on this program here, Peter, really representing the Jewish community. Now, how must it feel for Israel and the Jewish community now to actually feel some real love for the first time in over 8 years? More so than that in President Trump and what the US administration is doing, especially at this time of Hanukkah.
Oh, Simon, if only I did represent the whole of the Jewish community.
Yeah, but you are on this programme.
So,
you're on the board of deputies
The
anyway.
Jewish community, I've got to tell you, is divided. There's no doubt about that. Now, I represent that part of the community which is absolutely delighted about President Trump's pronouncements. There's no doubt about that. And I have to say, the vast majority of members in my community similarly. However, when one watches the media, especially the American media, CNN, etc., they seem to show an imbalance to the left, which are specifically anti-Trump. And there is no doubt about it that a decent minority within the Jewish community are fearful about President Trump's pronouncements. I think that fear will be overcome in 2018 as more and more countries endorse the president's view, and as hopefully, as we've suggested, that there won't be anything like the volatility within Jerusalem as there was in previous intifadas. So from my perspective, absolutely over the moon, delighted, and hopefully if we're sitting here next year, we'll be saying, look at all these other countries that have endorsed Jerusalem as the capital.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, we're down to the last minute, but I think I want to sum up here and say that what we've really seen by President Donald Trump has been truly historic, and those who support Israel, those who support the Jewish community can be very proud. And it's time that we all got behind President Donald Trump and just cut through all this media lies and negative reporting that we see about him, and to know that he is actually a history maker.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
there's nothing to fear but fear itself.
Absolutely. Michael, thank you very much for being my guest on the programme, and I'm a big fan of your work, and also you as well, Peter. So thank you for being on the Late Show.
Thank you very much, Simon.
And I just thank you for watching today's Late Show. Let's remind ourselves of where our Messiah is coming back to. He's coming back to the city of Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives, not New York, not Washington, not London. So let's continue to pray, and let's continue to stand for the peace of Jerusalem and support Israel. I'll leave you with this fantastic song.
אוויר הרים צלול כיין וריח אורנים נישא ברוח ארבעים עם כל פעמונים ופתרת אילן ואבן שבויה בחלום אשר בדד יושבת ובליבה חומה. חזרנו אל אורות המים, לשוק ולכיכר, שופר קורא בהר הבית, בעיר העתיקה, ובנערות אשר בסלע, אלפי שמשות צורכות. נשוב נרד אל ים המלח בדרך יריחו, ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא אך בבואי היום לשיר לך ולך לקשור כתרים, קטונתי מצעיר בנייך או מאחרון המשוררים, כי שמך צורב את השפתיים כנשיקת שרף. אם אשכחך ירושלים